This is another reading of The Art of Prayer, a handbook on how to pray, written by Kenneth E. Hagin. This is the reading of chapter 22. Chapter 22 is entitled, Interceding for the Lost. Who hath heard such a thing? Who hath seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Isaiah 66, verse 8. Many have looked at this verse and thought it referred only to the rebirth of Israel as a nation. Yet most Old Testament prophecy has a twofold application, first the natural and then the spiritual. Isaiah is prophesying that Israel will be reborn as a nation in the natural, and that in the spiritual, Zion will travail and bring forth her children. Well, who is Zion? The New Testament tells us that the new covenant believer is not come to Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments under the Old Covenant, but that we are to come to Mount Zion. It calls the church Mount Zion. Hebrews 12:18 through 24 says, For ye are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burned with fire, nor unto blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words, which voice they that heard entreated that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure that which was commanded, and if so much as if a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with a dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake. But ye are come unto Mount Sion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling, that speaketh better things than that of Abel. Notice this calls the church of the general assembly of the firstborn Mount Zion. And our text in Isaiah 66:8 says, As soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Galatians 4:19 says, My little children, of whom I travail in birth again until Christ be formed in you. Paul is writing to the churches throughout Galatia, Galatians 1 verse 2. He intimates that he travailed in birth for them to be saved in the beginning. Now he is travailing again. We talk about making conversions. God does not mention conversions. He wants births. You must be born again. You cannot have births without having travail. The picture here is of a woman having a baby. Now, I do not mean that one must come to the altar and travail to be born again. The baby does not birth itself, but for true births out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of light, some person somewhere has travailed. Paul travailed. It was a spiritual activity. It is an intense suffering in the inner man. It is comparable to the pangs of the natural childbirth, and it involves real intercession. I had a friend, now with the Lord, who travailed in prayer and intercession until you would think his heart would break literally. Sure, it is hard on the outer man. Right. I've been there myself again and again. I could have any number of illustrations. This is one of the most outstanding, however. It happened the first night of December 1953 in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was conducting a meeting. During the meeting, I stayed in the home of one of the families in the church. After the Friday night service, they invited their 3 married daughters and their husbands to come to the home for refreshments and a time of visiting. We men were seated in the living room talking, and the women were in the kitchen preparing to serve the food, and suddenly I had the urge to pray. Now, don't misunderstand me. Nobody made me do it, but there was a burden about it. An urge to pray just seemed to fall upon me. I knew these folks would understand such a thing. If they would not have, I would have excused myself and gone in the privacy of my bedroom to pray. So I said to the host, I've got to pray, and I've got to pray now. Brother F called the ladies from the kitchen. Just forget about the food. Brother Hagin's got a burden to pray. Let's all join him. I knelt beside a large chair in the living room. The moment my knees touched the floor, I was in the Spirit, and I lifted my voice, praying in other tongues and groanings. It seemed like deep down within me, I was hurting so badly, like I was about to deliver a baby. In travail, there's pain. There's groanings, and I knew I was interceding. When the spirit of intercession for the lost is upon you, you'll feel within your own being that you are lost. You know that you are not. You know you are a child of God, but you take upon yourself the condition the other person is in. That person is lost, so you feel lost. I've had people come to me many times saying something like this, Brother Hagin, I know I'm saved and I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, but sometimes in the service, when God begins to move, I start to feel on the inside just like I'm lost myself. When the altar call is given, I wonder if I should go up to the altar myself. I wonder if perhaps I'm not right with God. That's intercession, I explained to them. That's the Spirit of God trying to roll the burden of some lost soul off on someone. He was searching through the congregation to find someone he could use. When that happened again, if you can't contain yourself and the service is still going on, get up and go to a place of prayer. Otherwise, sit there quietly and groan within yourself until the person you are interceding for responds to the altar call. There is something out here in this area that we need to learn again. The art of intercession is a lost art among us. We'll never really have the depth of the move of the Spirit of God until we have that kind of intercession. I prayed that Friday night in Phoenix with groanings and with tears and other tongues for about an hour. I knew I was interceding for someone who was lost. I knew to keep at it until I had a note of victory. A note of victory, that is when the burden lifts and you feel light and wonderful and blessed, or when you begin to sing in other tongues, or when you begin to laugh instead of groan. In other words, you have whatever it is that you are praying about. Once in a great while, the Lord will let me know what or whom I'm praying about, and that Friday night, He let me know. He gave me a vision, and I saw the church where I was holding a meeting full of people, and I saw myself at the pulpit preaching. I heard myself preach a sermon I had never preached before, and I heard myself give 4 points to this sermon. I got a brand new sermon, which I preached the following Sunday night. I saw myself finish the sermon and then lean over the pulpit and point to a man sitting in the second seat from the front. And I heard myself say, as I pointed to him, Friend, God shows me that you are 70 years and that you've been brought up to believe that there is no hell. But He told me to tell you that you have one foot in hell right now and the other one is slipping in. And I saw that man leave the pew and come and kneel at the altar and be saved. And I knew I was making intercession for him. I knew I was travailing in prayer for him. The folks present knew I had seen something, so they asked me, and I told them. I described the man to them, and I described how he was dressed. The following Sunday night, everything came to pass exactly as I had seen it the preceding Friday. Those people who had prayed with me told me after the service, Brother Hagin, we had that fellow located before you ever even got into service. He was sitting where you said he would be sitting. He was dressed just as the way that you saw him. He had never seen him. We had never seen him before. Nobody in the church had ever seen him, so they wouldn't have known to pray. But the Holy Spirit knew. The man was saved along with the others. After the service, he came to hug the pastor and me, and he said to the pastor, "This preacher here said I was 70, but I'm 72. This is the first time I've ever been inside a church building. The preacher said I was raised to believe that there is no hell. My parents were universalists. They taught me that there is no hell. This preacher told me that God told him to tell me I had one foot in hell and the other one was slipping. I know exactly what he meant. That's the reason why I came to Phoenix. I'm from up north where it's cold, but I had a severe heart attack and my doctor thought it would help my health to come here." And somebody said, "He got saved Sunday night, but it really happened on Friday night when I was travailing in his birth." Travailing in birth. Do you know why babies are not being born into churches today? Oh, some churches have a lot of conversions, but few births. It is because there is no travail, no groanings. And when some people begin to travail and groan in prayer, others are ready to throw them out. Years ago, I ministered in a full gospel church that was running several hundred in the Sunday morning services. And on Sunday night, the building was almost full. They had a dear old lady, dear old Grandma Greer, who was at that time 80 some odd years of age. And she had been in Pentecost since the turn of the century. Way back in 1906, she had been baptized in the Holy Spirit. She knew something about travailing and waiting on God. The old-timers did. She would pray at the altar, groaning and praying in other tongues and spirit of travail, carrying the entire thing probably on her own back. 3 years later, I came back to the same church, and instead of having the building full for Sunday morning services, they had about 80 or 90 people. On Sunday night, they had about 35 to 50. "What happened?" I asked somebody. One of the members said, "Do you remember old Grandma Greer?" I said, "Yeah." "Well, she was at the altar praying like she always did, and the new pastor got up and said, 'We're not going to have any of that around here,' and he put a stop to it. They had no more babies being born because there was no travailing. When Zion travails, she brings forth children." And that concludes the reading of chapter 22.